BLOKWORX President Rob Boles is here to weigh in on news from Enable, WatchGuard, and Epson, as well as an in-depth look at ways to prosper in hardware, plus a special guest interview with WatchGuard's CSO, Corey Nachreiner, on current and anticipated security threats. It's ChannelPro Weekly, number 189, Puffin Security. Hello and welcome to ChannelPro Weekly, episode 189. My name is Matt Whitlock, technology editor, online director, your host of this fine program for folks like you. And who are you? Well, step in front of the mirror and take a long look at yourself. Revel in the glory that is you. You are the VAR, the MSP, the IT integrator, the IT consultant. You're the person that when you look at yourself, you think, gee whiz, I want to do some patches today. Or something along those lines. I don't know. It could be anything along that line, but that is you. We're glad that you're here to join us for this fine show. We've got a lot lined up for you today. Lots of news, lots of stories to talk about, great interviews lined up, as well as a good guest host. But first, the man of the hour, the one who joins me each and every week, executive editor, Rich Freeman. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Matt. We are back after a week's absence, deep in the heart of Texas.
We are back. Maybe that's why I'm a little off today. It feels like it's been a year since we've been on, although it has only been about 14 days. But yeah, it was an exciting week. Rich, what happened?
We were in Dallas last week. We were doing a ChannelPro SMB forum event. We've been doing those monthly for a long time, but this is the first one in 15 months that actually had a live in-person audience. We also had people watching online, which was great, but for the first time in a long time, we got into a room with a bunch of real live three-dimensional physical people and did a conference with them. It was pretty nice.
Unfortunately, everybody showered. So that was one of the highlights, is that it was very clean smelling in the room. But no, Rich, it was great because it was almost surreal when you showed up on Monday, and I was like, wow, I haven't actually seen you in person. I talk to you like every week, all the time, but I hadn't seen you in like well more than a year. So it was kind of weird.
I totally agree. The first thing I said to Michael Siggins, our boss, is, oh yeah, that's what you look like in 3 dimensions. I kind of forgotten. Yeah, it's different.
Although, I hadn't seen you in a year, and you show up on Monday, and then you wait 2 hours to come and say hello. That was kind of weird, You couldn't just come right away.
Well, we'll take this offline, but I was actually trying to find you. You were inside the conference room setting up, and I tried every darn door. I didn't want to pound on the door and pull you away from whatever but I could not get into that room to say hello.
Oh, well, you should have pounded on the door. I would have opened it, I forgot. Yeah, they did have, because we have all that stuff in there. So we were keeping it kind of locked up so that way nobody would walk in and take it. Because, there are immoral people on this planet, Rich, that take things that don't belong to them. Did you know that?
I had heard this, and I think it's going to come up more than a few times over the course of this episode.
Yeah, and not only real life people who take stuff, people who take stuff digitally and virtually. And we're going to have a lot of conversations about that on this show for sure. And why are we going to have conversations like that? Because we have an awesome security expert here with us, not only for an interview later, but also as our guest host today. So excited that he's back. He's a U.S. Marine veteran with over 20 years experience in cybersecurity and complex global networks, designing infrastructure for hundreds of companies with large and small municipalities and more. Please welcome the founder and president of BLOKWORX, Robert Boles. Welcome, Robert.
Hey, thanks, guys. Wow, Matt, introduction like that. I want to meet that guy. So,
well, apparently we're allowed to do that in person now, which is kind of amazing. So you'll just have to get to our next show.
Wasn't the last live ChannelPro event also in Dallas prior to that?
Yes, it was.
It was. And that also made the experience even a little bit more surreal too, because it's the last ballroom we were in was that one before all this stuff hit the fan. And then it's we were back there again. And it was weird because it felt like a long time ago, but it also felt like it was just yesterday. It was really, really strange. I think going to a different hotel would have been helpful in that, making it feel different and it had been a long time. But anyway, Robert, I'm glad you're here. Why don't you, for those who may have missed the last show you were on, which was a while ago. In fact, it was right before we did that event in 2020. It was in February, before the whole COVID thing even happened. So for those who may not know about you, what you do, what BLOKWORX is all about, tell us.
Yeah, no, certainly. Thank you. So BLOKWORX is a master managed security service provider. We're channel only. We only work with MSPs, and we provide basically SIM, SOC, SOAR, endpoint, cloud. You know, in today's environment, basically wherever the resource is, it needs to be treated and protected like an endpoint. So we provide all those services, as well as we do a lot of training with MSP partners. You know, a lot of MSPs come to us and they're like, hey, I know I need security. I think I do these things pretty well, but I don't know beyond this what I really should be looking at. So we spend a lot of time just educating on fundamentals, right? Because as we'll probably end up talking about today, just the simple things of still patching and updating and doing the basic maintenance are highly relevant. So great to be here. Thank you, guys.
It's awesome having you here. And so you've done how old is BLOKWORX? You started that a while ago, right?
Yeah, actually, wow. You know, sometimes we don't want to think about time, but it was 2006 when the idea was kind of born, and 2007 we became real. So it's been a minute, ton of changes. Right from the start, we came out of the gate focused on security, reliability, and a positive user experience, and the world wasn't ready yet in 2006 for just a security specific provider. So we became an MSP, and really I had to work on things I didn't know, like desktops and workstations. And in 2015, I kind of was like, yeah, I don't want to work on things that users touch anymore. So we went back to really just focusing on complex wide area networks and security. And in 2018 became channel only, and somewhere along the path we had to start defending endpoints and dealing with users again. So it's been a great ride, but happy to be here.
So 2006, that's when digital dinosaurs roamed the earth in terms of computer time.
Right, things that you couldn't even conceive. I think GeoCities was still a thing. So
quite prophetic too, not wanting to touch things that end users touched. I think you were predicting the coronavirus pandemic well back in the day. So smart move. So Robert, what else? You know, we talked about a lot of things in the last show, so I encourage folks to go back and listen. But what are some of the things that you do for fun when you're not doing all of these security-related endpoint protection things?
Mountain biking, kayaking, and hiking. I think if I've learned anything over the last 18 months or so, the need to disconnect from screens and technology is real. And so being able to get out in the trees, on the water, on a single track, yeah, that's time that feeds the spirit, right? So
have you always been outdoorsy, or is that something that just kind of stemmed later on in life?
No, I think what happens is kind of what happens for a lot of us, right? When we're young, we play, we do things, we got our buddies, our crew, we run around, and it's a blast, right? And even in the core and a lot of earlier stages in life, those things were present. And then suddenly we have responsibility and career and clients and partners and all these things that depend on us to be present. And I think in a way, a lot of people in our space, and maybe it's universal, but specifically in IT space, the community is such a caring, giving, wanting to be helpful community that we end up taking care of everybody but ourselves. So recognizing that need to take care of yourself and get out and unplug, yeah, it's a good thing. I encourage everybody to do it.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of people, there's a lot of burnout in the IT industry because of what you're saying, of a lack of taking care of yourself. So that's very, very good advice. Now at BLOKWORX, do you have a culture that promotes that, that tries to get people to take care of themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's something I actually pride myself on a lot is working as a channel partner. We get a glimpse into the culture of literally, I mean, I think we have 165 partners now, but we get a glimpse into a lot of different work styles. And one thing that I was really top of mind when I started this was, you know, recognizing that work is work. It's how we take care of ourselves. It's how we take care of our families, but you have to have balance. And so let's talk about one of the challenges that my space faces right now, you know, analyst burnout. There's a lot of entities out there that are processing security data for literally anything, right? And so there's no uniformity, there's no standardization. They'll basically just say, hey, we'll monitor anything. And so it creates a tremendous amount of noise that analysts then have to sort through. And it puts just such a ridiculous amount of stress on these people. And so we're really built with a ton of intelligence and automation built in, because there'll be times, obviously, that we have to burst because of activity, but my team's day-to-day is not in a stressful state, right? We very much encourage work-life balance. In fact, we're toying with some floating schedule kind of stuff right now, because the last thing I ever want any of my people to have to deal with at the end of the day is not being able to be at their daughter's recital or their son's baseball game or whatever it may be. And, you know, doctor's appointments, these things come up. So we create a flexible working environment where we honor the family and the individual, encourage personal growth, but at the same time, my team is very purpose driven and knows that, hey, when duty calls, we're there, right? So.
Hey, before we move on, I want to quickly check on something, and I hope I'm remembering this right, but I think BLOKWORX rolled out a new service within the last month or two. Do you guys have like a new offering that you recently launched?
Wow. So yeah, we do, and it's a logging SIM SOAR kind of hybrid solution. And when I say SOAR, and for users who may be, that's a new term, security orchestration, automated remediation. And what a SOAR does, you know, if you think of a SIM as a centralized logging and visibility tool, a SOAR brings additional intelligence to then ingest all of this data that's being collected by all of these points of monitoring, if you will, whether it's cloud, edge, endpoint, network, and then correlates looking for indicators of compromise and threat. And so what it really does, and this kind of contributes to the previous piece of the conversation, is when something is determined to be high or critical, that's where it lands in an analyst's purview for human validation. Right. So we actually follow what we call a blueprint, which is complete visibility, reduce the attack surface, stop known threats, prevent unknown threats, and then automation with human validation. So what a SOAR really does is takes that overhead of trying to correlate millions and millions and millions of events across our base and says, these are the interesting things that we should be paying attention to so that we can be actionable where it most makes sense. So.
Interesting. Another acronym that I did not know, Rich. A SOAR.
Well, Matt, I'll tell you, when you get a bunch of military prior service people and IT people together, the acronym storm ensues. So.
Well, awesome. Well, it sounds like an interesting product, and I am also very happy that you're here. I know last time you were on, we did talk a little bit about some of your outdoor adventures and things that you like to do. So I encourage everyone to go back and check out episode 134. To learn a little bit more about Robert, but I want to go full steam ahead here because we got a lot to talk about because we missed a week, and I don't know how much of last week's news we're going to go into, Rich, but we're gonna highlight what was kind of going on. We got some news this week though. Enable's in the news. We're going to talk about WatchGuard. Epson is in the news this week, and we're going to talk about a story, prospering in hardware, a topic near and dear to my heart. Plus, we got a great interview coming up later in the show with Corey Nachreiner from WatchGuard. He's the CSO there. We're going to talk about a lot of security stuff. Great conversation. You're definitely not going to want to miss that, and a whole lot more. So strap in, folks. We're going on a wild ride. You ready, Robert?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So Rich, Enable's in the news. They've outlined some near-term and long-term roadmap plans. I didn't know that they were into driving and highway city street mapping, but it looks like that's the business that they're going into. Rich, tell us about that.
No, I will share some news from Enable. I can say up front, none of it involves trucks or driving or building roads or anything like that. But they did talk about roadmaps. On this was last week, actually, when we were in Dallas. They did their annual Empower event, ordinarily a face-to-face event. For the second year in a row, for obvious reasons, they did it virtually. They mentioned, by the way, that they will be face-to-face again in 2022. But they did a strategy update, a roadmap update, et cetera. And so we learned some very specific kind of near-term things, and then got a glimpse at some longer-term plans that they have. From a near-term perspective, they are going to be adding DNS filtering technology to the platform over the course of Q3, Q4. And they're going to be doing that in partnership with a vendor some folks in the audience might have heard of before, named DNS Filter. So they're going to take DNS filter technology and they're going to create their own kind of flavor of that and build it into the Enable platform. I should say, I don't know if this is common knowledge just yet or not, or if it's still just a little bit too early. Enable is the former SolarWinds MSP. We believe that company is going to get spun off as an independent, publicly traded business at some point in the future, although what they said about that basically at the event last week is, we are still contemplating the spin, as they put it. But I think everybody believes that's going to happen sooner or later, and they are operating under a new name now, Enable. So they have DNS filtering coming. It will arrive for their on-premises RMM system in Q3. Their cloud-based RMM will get it in Q4 with DNS filter. It fits within a pattern with those guys where they've been forging these partnerships with leaders in various categories to add security capabilities in particular to their portfolio, rather than buying a company or developing something from scratch in-house. So they have alliance relationships with SentinelOne for EDR, for example. They're working with Microsoft and Intune on mobile device management. They have a deal with Cisco Meraki. So not totally surprising to see them now, when they want to add DNS security of the platform, to work with a third party on that. They have a client device analytics system coming up here in the future. Apparently, they've been working on this for a while. They got as far enough along in the process to share a beta with their partners, who apparently gave it a bit of a thumbs down. They decided, we're not going to release this, but they kept most of the behind the scenes kind of guts of the solution, and then integrated it with Power BI, the Microsoft business intelligence kind of front end, which they feel is going to be a lot easier to work with. And so that is coming along. It's going to dig into all the endpoint telemetry that companies like Enable gather, and do things like predictive analytics, help you identify unpatched or low performance kind of devices, et cetera. Now, from a bigger picture standpoint, there was a roadmap presentation by Mike Adler. He is the Chief Technology and Product Officer at Enable. A little light on detail, but I'll cut the guy some slack because he's only been in that job since April. So this is sort of the vision that he's come up with. But it sounds, kind of ambitious. There were a lot of additional incremental capabilities that he's looking to add over some kind of time frame in the future. Datto only recently added quoting, a quoting solution, for example. ConnectWise has been doing that for a while, and this was on the roadmap. That Enable will have its own quoting tool of some kind further on down the road. Again, not a lot of specifics, but they are going to be looking to add tools for managing cloud-based workloads, which is something that we're hearing a lot of these big, RMM, PSA kind of vendors talking about now. When does that come along? How robust is that functionality? How good is it compared to the smaller vendors that specialize in cloud management? All TBD, but Enable is very much part of that club of big established companies that knows it needs to get serious about cloud management. He also talked a little bit about what they're calling their secure by design methodology. And again, all the big vendors are kind of doing this right now, where they're really trying to build more rigorous security practices into the product development process. Enable being the former SolarWinds MSP, SolarWinds being a name that's been in the media more than a little bit in the last 6-8 months because of a supply chain attack and so on. They made a point letting folks know that we're going above and beyond. And I should say that the SolarWinds Orion breach had no implications whatsoever for Enable, but anyone with, you know, SolarWind in their name now or recently is going to come under scrutiny. And they say they're, you know, doing their darndest basically to make it extremely difficult for somebody to touch their source code and execute one of these supply chain kinds of attacks. So yeah, that and that, you know, it was a multi-day event. We were a little occupied with our own event in Dallas, but that's just a bit of what they were talking about last week.
I'm disappointed that we didn't get to talk about trucks. That sounded like it would have been a fun discussion. But no, lots of stuff there from Enable. Robert, I want to send it over to you. Any of those things sound good to you? Anything you want to comment on?
Well, DNS is such a core to everything, right? So I think it's a smart move to integrate that in just because of protections. I mean, when you start considering the risk that can be introduced because of DNS or faults of DNS or DNS tunneling, you know, most firewalls are configured just to accept DNS traffic, and they don't even consider that there could be a malicious payload within a DNS tunnel, right? So having that DNS protection, strong move. So
is it surprising that at all that they didn't buy a company, like they partnered with a company? I'm just so used to the whole mergers and acquisition thing these days that I would have expected them, if they wanted that tech, to just buy it to integrate it. Does that surprise you, Rich?
Well, I mean, it doesn't surprise me for these guys only because, as I say, they've been doing this for a while, but there aren't a lot of other vendors out there who have adopted that kind of strategy. I mean, I think you're exactly right. Is the build or buy kind of duality tends to predominate, and partner is the third option. They're not the only people in the world to do that, but they do a lot more of it. And you know, the advantages are obvious in terms of time to market and cost. Either the cost of, you know, developing it yourself or buying a company that already has the product. If you can kind of partner with somebody instead, it's going to be more affordable and it's going to be faster.
Interesting.
Rich,
Go ahead, Rob.
I think that faster is the key word, right? Because with the threat landscape, I mean, it sounds funny to say it because we've been talking about it for years now, the way it's escalating, but if it's even possible, it feels right now as though it's escalating at an even more exponential pace. So getting that level of protection in sooner than later, it kind of just makes sense, right? So
for sure. Now you were talking a little bit about payloads through DNS tunnels. Does you see that a lot? Is DNS generally an area of concern for security?
So yes, you know, DNS hijacking. Now there's a lot of opportunities in the channel for people to leverage tools that protect against DNS, and it's, you know, 2FA is something that should be everywhere, and I imagine that most MSPs now are leveraging some trusted DNS partner, but most folks probably aren't even aware that DNS tunneling is a risk, right? And I don't know if it's being considered in security stacks as a risk that it is, right? We happen to be aware of it because one of our key partners, that's a core aspect that we get a lot of education on, but the risk is real. So
very interesting. Rich, now you talked about a lot of things here in this story. Was there anything in this roadmap that took anybody by surprise, or that seemed more interesting than not?
I mean, probably nothing earth shattering. I was a little bit interested to see that, you know, that quoting software was specifically like a gap in the portfolio that they're looking to fill, but I don't know if that would be hugely surprising.
All right. Well, if that's not surprising to you, then it's not surprising to Robert, which means we'll talk about something else. And we have lots of other things to talk about, including WatchGuard, who we're actually going to be talking with Corey Nachreiner later on. He's from WatchGuard, but they've got a new endpoint security solution that they're rolling into their stuff. Tell us about that, Rich.
Yeah, and I mean, on its own, this is not necessarily an enormous piece of news, but it is for WatchGuard a very significant landmark in terms of a process that they've been on for a number of years now. So, you know, when people hear WatchGuard, I think still when people hear WatchGuard, they tend to think firewall. I mean, that's what those, you know, they were all about perimeter and network security for a long time. And like everybody else, they realized, you know, with the shift to cloud and work from anywhere and so on and so forth, the perimeter is kind of vanishing, and to be all in on firewalls is probably not a great long-term plan. It also probably doesn't set up your partners and your customers for real security success. So they've been kind of expanding what they do. They you know, through acquisitions and development and so on, they added an MFA product. So that's now part of the portfolio. And then more recently, they went out and acquired a company that this name might be familiar to folks, but a company called Panda Security, which does endpoint protection products. And then, gosh, it's a few years back now, I want to say 2018, 2017, they introduced a cloud management portal, and basically said that over time, they're going to roll all those different systems that they are developing or have introduced into that cloud management portal, so that you'll have the unified administration plane where you can get to and deploy and provision and manage all these different tools, and you'll have a complete set of tools to protect your customers with. And what they announced last week, it may even have been the week before, is that Panda endpoint protection lineup is now available via the cloud management portal. They did a rebrand on the Panda products, by the way. That set of systems is now called the WatchPoint Endpoint Security family. But you can manage that along with the MFA, along with the firewalls and everything through the integrated management portal. And this is kind of like, I don't want to, you know, it sounded like they're just sort of done, but this is sort of like the endpoint of that multi-year process that they were on, where they added the key capabilities that they felt like they needed to add to have a complete portfolio, and they got it all out there for you in that one management system. It's kind of a big deal for those guys. Interesting final note on that. They announced that they had completed the acquisition of Panda on June 2nd, 2020. And they said that we're going to build that product set into the cloud management tool within 1 year. And they announced that they had done that 1 year to the day. Basically, they made a promise and they kept it. It was a matter of hours, but they got it done.
I don't know. Do you think that they actually just had it done like the week before, and they said, you know what would be really cool from a PR perspective if we say we got it done a year to the day?
It's more dramatic this way. Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking. You know, you gotta spin the narrative and make it sound exciting and give people a reason to notice. So Robert, I'll turn it over to you first. They've got this integration done. It's all renamed WatchGuard Cloud. Is this a compelling solution that people should be looking at? What do you think?
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to talk to Corey about it in a little bit. But you know, the idea of, well, first off, I'm not super familiar with WatchGuard, but the concept of being able to aggregate all of that threat data that will be gleaned now from these endpoints into a data lake or whatever they decide to do with it, definitely will increase and improve their visibility, which can only lead to better security. Right, so it's definitely a complementary move. A lot of other vendors have followed that strategy, so I think it's a good move for them.
Rich, what are you seeing here with this with this completion, right, of Panda being rolled into WatchGuard? And I know there's a lot in here about their partner program and how they're bringing those people over. I'm not going to comment on the name of the WatchGuard partner program because I'm sure you can guess why. Folks who have been listening to the show for a long time know why I'm not going to say anything about the name of the partner program. Where do they go from here now? Now it's rolled in, it's done. What's the future of this at WatchGuard?
Well, I mean, it's a great question because I don't know what if or what the next sort of big piece of the puzzle might be for them. If they feel like, okay, you know, we're covered on the network and the endpoint and mobile with the MFA, we need what, and I'm just making this up, we need, you know, cloud security or whatever. I, you know, like I said before, I do assume this, they don't feel like mission accomplished, we're done. You know, given how, like Rob was saying, how rapidly the threat landscape evolves. They've put in a pretty well-rounded, pretty solid foundation right now for adding additional tools and capabilities later, and you know, and integrating the management the way a lot of these other security vendors do. So I don't know specifically what will come next, but I'll bet they'll be looking to roll in other functions that they haven't covered yet.
Now, do you think this is the last we're going to see of the panda name? It seems like a shame that a mascot of was so cuddly and cute is now gone. Robert, what do you think? Do we need more cuddly names in security products?
You need, absolutely, you need more cute, cuddly names in security. I mean, it's such a dark context anyways. We put rounded edges on it and friendly little critters, and we could change the world with that. So why not?
Okay, so what of all of the cute, cuddly animals that you could use other than a panda, Robert, if you had your security company and you're going to give it a cute, cuddly mascot critter, what critter would you go with?
That is a great question, because we actually did that. Ours, I don't know if it's cute, but we went through a rebrand in the front end of whatever happened last year. And we worked with a great company, and I had this small request at the end. I said, hey, you know what? I've always thought gargoyles are just wicked cool. So if you can figure out a way to weave a gargoyle in, that would be awesome. And they came back and did it. And it became kind of a, you know, a secondary kind of a cool logo we could play with. But yeah, you know, so I don't know how cute and cuddly gargoyles are, but they're definitely protectors. So, you know.
They are protectors. I like that angle, although cute and cuddly is usually not what I think of when I think of a gargoyle.
Yeah, most images of gargoyles are not anything you want to look at any longer than you have to, right? So, but ours is cool. I will promise everyone that. So,
I do like it. Rich, if you were going to go with a cute, cuddly animal, what animal would you pick?
You know, I mean, this is actually kind of a challenging thing, because in a way, panda is almost the perfect choice in that, you know, panda bears, they are cuddly, but they're bears. They'll tear you to shreds, right? Like, so, you know, you don't want to do kitty cat security or something like that. It just doesn't really sound like you're going to be safe. So what is the cuddly but fierce animal? You know, other than a panda, I'm not sure.
Yeah, to get the fierceness, you definitely got to stay within the bear family. Although there are many like cat-like species, you know, like tigers and stuff that some might consider cute and cuddly. I was thinking like the puffin. You ever seen one of the, like the Arctic puffin? Puffin security, I think, should be the next wave company out there, and somebody better buy that domain quickly.
I was just going to say, I hope you've already done that, or do it immediately after the recording session here.
Yeah, or there's the capybara from South America. You ever seen those? That's like you have to look that one up, but it doesn't roll off the tongue like puffin does. Although gargoyle security has a nice ring to it as well.
Well, puffin just sounds fun, right? Because if you're puffing, you're having fun, whatever.
Are puffins mean though? I got to look this up to see if they'll peck your head out or something. I need to do more research on the puffin. And next week on Exotic Cute Animal Weekly, we'll discuss the mating habits of the northern puffed ridged. Okay, we're getting now way off target. Rich, anything else that's comment about I'm just lost on cute cuddly animals now. I gotta go back to that. What WatchGuard? What else about WatchGuard do we need to talk about here that was interesting?
I think we're good. I think, like you said, there was also a lot in the article, which we'll link to from the show notes, about integrating Penguin, you see, you're doing it to me, Panda's partner program.
Penguins, penguins are cute, and they are efficient hunters too. Penguin security could also be a good one. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. Panda had a partner program when WatchGuard bought them, and so they're kind of bringing those two partner programs together. So that work is going on, but we don't need to get into that. What we need to do is talk about what's the difference between a penguin and a puffin, because I know there is one. I'm just not sure what it is.
I don't think puffins swim. I think a puffin is just a bird.
Okay.
But I am not an animal expert, I will say. And for those, I don't know if my mic caught this, but my daughter was walking by the door and I have it open because she just got home. And I don't know where she fell in this conversation, but I don't know if you heard it, but she was just cracking up over here laughing about whatever the heck we were talking about. So that was pretty funny. All right, let's move on. Oh, I love talking about Epson, and I love talking about SUPERTANK printers because they're awesome and you can print as much as you want and they're great. This is not a paid ad for Epson. I have one and they're awesome, but they have a new high capacity, low cost A3 model. Rich, tell us about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I specifically kind of put it in the lineup of stories we're talking about here because I kind of wanted to see your reaction to this. I know you really feel like the cost and the capacity of these tank-based printers from Epson and others are really kind of game changers in printing generally. And the numbers associated with this new device, they look big to me. I'm sort of curious to get your reaction to that. So Epson has introduced a new business inkjet printer. It's called, for those of you who are curious, the WorkForce STC8090, A3 color multifunction printer. What's most significant, there are a number of interesting features about it, but what's most significant about it is that it comes with 3 sets of ink in the box, which is not something that's always true with the inkjets. And so they're basically saying you open this thing up, you've got enough ink inside the box to handle 19,500 mono pages, black and white pages, or 14,800 color pages. Plus, and this isn't just true for this device, this is true for any of the business inkjets from Epson. They also come with what Epson calls a 2-year ink guarantee. So if those 3 sets of bottles aren't enough for you, because, you know, and Epson says that should be 2 years worth of ink for most people, but if it's not, you can order up to 2 additional sets, or, you know, and enough, they were saying, to handle an additional 12,000 color pages, and they will reimburse you for it. So basically you can get 2 more sets of bottles for nothing. And you know, this is obviously very convenient and economical for the end user, and the estimated cost per page on this device is 2 cents a page. But this is also actually, you know, good news for a partner as well, because your average sale prices are going up. The MSRP on this device is essentially $1,500, and some of that is because of the ink. So average sale prices on printers, they go up, and you're not sort of competing with Amazon and Staples and so on the ink business. You're capturing that ink revenue yourself, and you're doing it up front because it's included in the box. So this is actually kind of a nice deal for partners as well. So you know, to me, it's just it sounds like a crazy amount of capacity to come with a new printer, but I'm sort of curious what you think, Matt.
So yeah, you mentioned the higher upfront cost, and I think that's what's important here, is that you do pay more for these ink-based printers up front, because in the printer business in the inkjet world has, and in the laser world too, I guess, but particularly in the inkjet world, it's been the razor blade model for years and years and years and years and years, right? They give you the razor blade handle and a starter blade, and then they rip you off on every replacement blade there on out. So you end up paying ridiculous amounts of money for that razor because they just kill you on the consumable. Well, the Epson SUPERTANK line, and Rich, we've been very prophetic here on ChannelPro Weekly. When we were talking about these printers a few years ago, maybe even 3 years ago when they first kind of came out, that this was not, they hit something here with this model, because people in general are getting very, very sick and tired of being overcharged ridiculous sums of money for ink, right? The cost of back in the razor blade, in that blade model before, the cost of per drop of ink was more than the cost of per drop of human blood. And there's a problem when you're paying that much for ink, right? So when you get one of these, it feels like a deal, right? Every time you go to print on one of these things, you feel like you just got a bargain, right? You can print as much as you want, and it doesn't matter, because the ink is what they say here. For now, this one is a little more than this is a business class line. I don't know if the ink bottles are what size they are or whatnot, but you're talking $30 per black bottle and $22.99 for each color bottle. Let's do the math. Basically $100 to fill the printer, right? But if with some of the other lines that they had in the past, that's like the equivalent of buying 30 inkjet cartridges, right? Which the other companies sell for $30 a piece, right? In some cases. So it's a massive amount of capacity, and it removes a problem in business, and it removes a problem in there's consumer models as well. But in business, you know, there's a lot of printing that goes on. People say paper is dead. It is not. It is not dead. But if you have employees that print a lot, particularly who need color, you either have to restrict their use of color because it's so darned expensive to let everybody print color as much as they want, or you just have this massive line item cost every month to support printing. And this practically goes away with a printer like this. So it's cool stuff. This is an A3 model. So it's 11 by 17. It's dual tray. So there's a reason why the cost of this one's a little higher, because it's got 2 trays. It's bigger sheets. It's got some other security stuff built into it that a small or medium business would want. 2-year warranty and a crap load of ink. Now, Robert, have you ever used one of these?
I have not, but if I'm understanding correctly, is it refillable? That's what these extra bottles are, so that you don't have all the cartridge overhead. And
yeah, there's no cartridges. You basically buy like a bottle of ink, like it's just a bottle of ink, and it's keyed to each one. You stick it on there, and it like fills a tank, right? So there's like this whole tank full of ink for everything in there, and then you can just print to your heart's content. And it's like the ink never goes. It's like you never go through it, and eventually you will have to refill it. But like one fill up of this is like replacing it with like 30 inkjet cartridges.
Yeah, no, I love the razor analogy, right? Because we've all been there and can appreciate that. So no, it sounds super cool. Where can I go get one?
I sound like a salesman. They're everywhere fine printers are sold, you know? But no, Rich, it's great to see that Epson's continuing to drive this, and they are making a difference, because like since Epson came out with their first initial line of SUPERTANK printers, they put a lot of pressure on other companies to try and to kind of look at how they do that model. Now, the razor blade model still exists in printers. Even Epson still does it as well with their normal line, and that's how you can end up buying a color inkjet printer with a scanner for $99 or $79 at the store. But what I always tell people is that the cheaper the printer that you pay for, the more you're going to pay for that printer over time, right? Because even what they give you in the box isn't even like a full inkjet cartridge. It's like a starter cartridge. So as soon as you start printing on it, like it'll print like 8 sheets, and then you have to go back to the store and pay just as much as you did for the printer to actually put inkjet cartridges in it, right? That's not how it works here, but you do pay a little more upfront. But like I was saying though, they put a lot of pressure, because HP has a tank-based kind of printer now. Brother has one now. I think there's another inkjet company. I think who's the other big one? I'm forgetting. Rich, who's the other big ink?
Canon do that?
Canon, yes, I believe they have an ink-based model now as well. So there's a desire. We live in an all you can eat society now, right? Like nobody wants limits. Nobody wants to hold back. You know, if you want to stream on Netflix, you want access to the whole catalog, right? You don't want to buy things a la carte. Printing is kind of the same way now. Like people want to print, and they want to print as much as they want, and they don't want to feel like they got hosed during the process.
You want a little further evidence of that? I thought this was really interesting because you were saying before, everybody says paper is dead, paper is not dead, printing obviously not dead. Here's some evidence for that. Global printer shipments grew 19.3% year over year in the first quarter of 2021, according to IDC. And and just to kind of put that in this is not an apples to apples comparison, but late in 2020, IDC was projecting that global security spending would go up something like 6%. It's like the printer market, which is presumably a smaller one, but still it's growing significantly faster. That there is still business to be done around printers.
There is, and there was a huge boom in printing when you get into the hybrid workforce. There's a lot of printers being put into homes because a lot of people don't have printers, which I find mind-boggling to me. But when everybody started to go home for work, you started to see a huge demand on maybe not ones quite as this. This is kind of enough to support a small work group, but they make home-based printers that use the whole tank-based design, and they're hard to get. So there is a huge demand for print and paper for sure. And it's good to see that that they're continuing to do that. Now, do you think that we're going to see more printing as a result of the hybrid workforce going as people go back into the office? What do you think, Robert?
I think there's a lot to be determined. People working out of the home, people going back to the office. I think as that the dust settles there, that'll become more clear. But honestly, I have no idea at this point. I know hopefully those printers are being appropriately secured.
We can only hope. Yeah, this model it specifically calls out some additional security things on this one. I think this is designed to be put into an office. And of course, like anything else, you got to watch for the updates and the firmware updates and all the patches. Always very, very, very important. Rich, one of the things that I'll talk about value, because like any business that does a lot on paper, especially if they have to go to a place and have copies and stuff made. Rich, when we do, I like to use our events as an example, because all of the printed materials that come from our event, with the exception of our show guide, are all printed on one of these things. And the reason for that is that if I want to go and make 100 or 500 color copies at a place, that you go to, like a FedEx office or whatever, they charge you like $1 to $1.50 a copy, right? This you can print for less than, they say 2 cents. I swear to God, mine never seems to run out of ink, and I print our entire event on the thing. And imagine if you're doing how many sheets your company is doing and how many copies they're making. That's significant savings if you're a small business. I'm not trying to sell this thing, but I'm just saying that's the whole point of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and call it $1 a page, at the store, and 2 cents a page if you're using one of these devices. I believe that's a 98% cost reduction. That adds up.
Wow.
That adds up, big time, big time. So Epson, I want my commission. I'm just going to say that right now. No, it's good stuff. I don't really have much else to say. The printer, this particular model does look nice. It's got a lot of cool features on it that if you're in a work group that you'll want. Good print speeds. They give an example of printing disposable menu placemats, because we live in a world that you got to have disposable everything now. So imagine if you're a restaurant, you got to go have these copied or made somewhere. That's big savings right there. Yeah, cool stuff. I don't have anything else to say. Rich, you want to comment anymore on the printer?
No.
Let's move on.
Let's move on.
Because we've talking about a printer here, which is a form of hardware, but we're going to talk about more in general, prospering in hardware. Now, what does that mean, prospering? Because I thought at first I said perspiring in hardware, and I'm like, well, that's only if the hardware is really hot. But tell us about how we're going to prosper in hardware.
Well, the hardware business is an interesting thing for channel pros, because every SMB out there uses hardware, and they're typically looking to their channel pro to help them procure and manage that stuff. But hardware is notoriously low margin stuff to sell, and in fact, there are plenty of MSPs out there who they're either not really in the hardware business, trying to kind of stay clear of it, or would like to get away from it if they could. But we did a story about, the original sort of working title of the story is the hardware partner of tomorrow. If the old model of selling hardware on a transactional basis, low margin, that's really not going to work for anybody. What is the model that potentially can work going forward? And there are some models that people are having success with. So 4 things in particular we'll quickly run through here. And the first is just do the little things and just make sure you're checking off the small obvious things. So when you're selling hardware, make sure you're selling a manufacturer service plan along with that. Make sure you're selling a warranty along with that. Make sure the warranties are up to date. Talk to your customers. If they're going to be using the hardware beyond the expiration date of the warranty, look into extending the warranty. It's a smart thing for the customer. It's a little bit of extra revenue for you. Standardization and reduce the number of vendors, say, that you're representing and selling. You'll have fewer devices that you need to be expert in, fewer kind of platforms that you need to know about, and that's going to reduce your overhead and make you more. So do the basic things. Beyond that, though, really what you want to do with hardware going forward is stop selling it on its own. The key to all of these different things we're talking about in this article here is bundling hardware together with software, with services. And in particular, if you can, when you can, sell all of that at one price on an as-a-service basis. So, people want to pay for everything month to month now, and that includes hardware. And you have a very powerful offer to a customer when you can come to them and say, here is a bundle. It includes the laptops that you need, but also the backup software and the security software that you need, and month-to-month management for my very skilled people. And you're not going to have to write out a big fat check to me at the beginning of this. You're going to pay X dollars a month for 3 years on this contract. And when we get to the end of that contract, I'm going to refresh the hardware for you. You're going to have the latest and greatest, most secure, and your people are going to be most productive and most happy because they're not working on antiquated machines. We quote numerous partners in the article who are succeeding and making very good money with that kind of a model. Take it a step further, do everything I just said and verticalize it. So create a bundle that's very specifically targeted at retail establishments or at K through 12 schools, as one of the partners we interviewed in the story does. And then you get that much more sticky and can work that much more margin in there if you're really kind of doing this on an industry specific kind of basis. Take end-to-end responsibility for the device as well, like disposing, end-of-life disposal and so on. Just look for all those little different life cycle opportunities to add some value for the customer and collect some revenue in return. And then, of course, all we're talking about here so far is, hardware as in PCs, but there's plenty of other hardware, in the technology world that can be profitable as well. And so digital signage, audio visual, you got people coming back to the office now. Meetings are going to be hybrid. You're going to need good AV gear in the meeting room so that the people in the meeting room and the people who are connecting via Zoom can all kind of communicate freely and effectively. There's going to be a lot of upgrades happening there. There are a lot of distributors who have professional services now that, they'll do white label. You don't have to even know all that much about AV to get into that business and make that offer to your customers. Video surveillance, private clouds is something that people are having success with. So, think big, think as a service. There are lots of different ways to make hardware a core part of what you do and actually get some margin doing it.
It is a fascinating article, Rich, and it really makes you think about a lot of the discussion and a lot of the trends we've seen with MSPs over the last, say, 5 years. And that is an exit of a lot of MSPs from even doing hardware, right? They focus on just services. And what does that say in a world where customers don't want to buy hardware anymore and have somebody management? They want just one package that includes it all. Because my gosh, Robert, who the hell wants to own computers? When you really think about it, they're out of date. That's like they're out of date the second you turn them on. by the time you hit the end of the life cycle, they're essentially useless, right? You own a paperweight at the end. Why buy it?
Well, why buy it? And for most MSPs, why sell it? Right? The competing against the bigger operations, right? Some of the behemoths in the universe, if you will, doesn't make sense. But the challenge is, if the MSP does not participate, then the user buys the lowest cost thing and then finds out, well, it doesn't have the right OS, or it doesn't have what they actually needed to do what they needed to do. So, you know, the concept is brilliant because it gives the opportunity to the MSP to really emphasize their value by bringing everything to the table without the flat transaction of just purchasing a device. And it gives the customer some certainty in that, hey, when this thing's no longer usable, I just re-up, get a fresh piece of whatever equipment I need, and the relationship goes on. So I think you're spot on, Rich.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Robert, like in a world where MSPs have gotten out of hardware, is this almost like saying, like, you might have to get back into it, because if you're not providing hardware bundles with your services, they're going to go somewhere else for the hardware, right? And that person might be offering those bundled hardware and software services together, and that's how you're going to lose customers. Is that possible, Rich?
Yeah, I would absolutely think so. I mean, you know, convenience factor alone. If you know, all I'm getting is the services from this guy, but there's this other guy over here who's offering the same services, but he's also kind of, you know, rolling in the hardware, and it's one bill, one invoice a month for all that stuff. Yeah, that could really put you at a competitive disadvantage.
Yeah, we've been talking about hardware as a service, gosh, since I don't know about our very first event. I wasn't part of that one, but our second event that we did in 2014, we were talking about the concept of hardware as a service, although it was very foreign it was a foreign kind of concept, I think, back then. But it seems like this is really the direction it's going. Do you see a time, Robert, where you don't where this is going to be the model, or do you think there's always going to be some you know, half and half, or some reason to own hardware?
It's a great question. I think it comes down to the personality of the end user, the entity, right? Are they CapEx or OpEx? What's the sophistication of their accounting combined with their tolerance for transitions, right? So on the surface, the simplicity is absolutely appealing, no doubt. But I think I'm going to contrast it with when the cloud first came out, and there was all this promise that the cloud was going to be the end all. It's going to save you money. You're not going to have all these expenses, and it's just going to be easy. And what a lot of companies found out, enterprises included, is once you put that data into the cloud, it maybe wasn't at the same efficiency and cost you thought it was. And then they recognized that the cost of getting back out was exponential. Right. So it created a whole different challenge. But, you know, the reality is, on the surface, on the low end, so much of this stuff is a commodity that there is an absolute opportunity for MSPs to simplify. But the partner selection process of what else they bundle to complete that stack, I think, will be the differentiator. How they come to the table with security, with BDR, with incident response, with disaster recovery planning, you know, the more they can stack into that, the more sticky it'll become. And then the ease of delivering, right? Can you remove the resistance so that the partner, or excuse me, the client perspective is painless, right? So it'll be interesting. You know, the thing I love about you guys is you bring these topics that force me to think about stuff. So.
And, you know, Rich, I'm glad that you brought up another thing that we kind of talk about a lot, and that's other opportunities in hardware that just kind of get left by the wayside by MSPs. Like, they think, okay, you know, like, yeah, I'll say the computer or whatever, like, if I have to, I'll do the hardware, and then they leave the customer to, like, go and buy the actual high margin hardware from other places, you know, like Amazon and Best Buy and stuff like that, like mouse pads and mice and keyboards and digital signs and all that stuff that like, that's the hardware that has margin. That's the stuff you want to be selling to your customers. So are you seeing a lot of resurgence and getting a little bit more encompassing about the hardware package as a whole, Rich?
Well, certainly seeing, and this has been like a theme for the last couple of years or so with the big distributors. I'm certainly seeing a surge on the distributor side where, for example, D&H set up a Pro AV business unit. I think it was round about the beginning of 2019. And their message very consistently is you should be selling this to your customers, and it really doesn't matter. Like I said before, it really doesn't matter if you've never done this before, because we have. So you need to do the sale to the customer, and you need to kind of collect some basic information about needs and so on. But we can actually come in and figure out exactly what devices the customer needs and mount that stuff to the wall and wire it all up. And as far as the customer is concerned, it's all coming from you. And if, from an ongoing support standpoint, like at D&H, again, for example, they're building this big professional services organization. They can kind of take on some of the support burden if you're not confident with that. So, and it's not just D&H. I mean, Tech Data, Cinex, Ingram Micro, they're all really kind of hammering home this theme in digital signage, in Pro AV, and so on. That we not only have the products now, but we have the services to kind of pull it all together, and we will do that on an outsourced kind of basis. So don't let your lack of experience in some of these high margin fields keep you away from getting in.
Awesome stuff. A great article. It's a long article. It touches on a lot of points, and there's a lot of great info in it. So folks who are listening, I encourage you to go read this one. We put our links to all of the articles that we talk about here on the show up on channelpronetwork.com. Find the show page for 189, and then you'll go and be able to read all those. If you're on YouTube, watching us on YouTube, open the description area, and from there you'll also get links to all of the articles as well, so you can go and you can read and get all the details, because we're just kind of giving our thoughts and giving our kind of high level opinions. But a lot of good stuff in here, as well as the other stories that we talked about. So with that, I think it's a good time to take a break. And when we come back, we've got an awesome interview lined up with Corey Nachreiner from WatchGuard. We're going to talk a little bit about security threats, and some other things as well. You won't want to miss that. Stick around. We'll be back in a moment.
Ready to grow your business in ways you haven't even imagined yet? Tune in to B2B Tech Talk, Ingram Micro's global podcast, to hear what's next in the IT space. Industry leaders, subject matter experts, and more share their valuable insights to provide listeners with the best growth opportunities, with some interesting stories sprinkled in along the way. Listen, subscribe, and follow B2B Tech Talk wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, because it's time to imagine more.
And welcome back to part 2 of Channel Pro Weekly. The past 15 months have been challenging, to say the least, and the massive uptick in ransomware and other forms of cybercrime hasn't helped. As such, security is at the top of mind for nearly everyone in the IT industry. And if it's not, well, I'm glad I'm not your customer. But what are the current threats out there, and what direction is it going? Here to discuss that and more is Corey Nachreiner, Chief Security Officer at WatchGuard. Welcome, Corey.
Hey, thank you, Matt. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you on. If you can, why don't you give us a little bit of background about you and a little bit about WatchGuard?
Yeah. So I've been in the security industry for over 23 years. At WatchGuard, I serve a number of roles, but my chief security officer role is to protect our organization itself. But I also run our threat lab, the WatchGuard Threat Labs. And that's a little team of researchers that I used to be one of back in my old WatchGuard days, where we just kind of keep our thumb on the pulse of the underground and pay attention to security in general to see what's happening, among these threat actors, so that we can always ensure to protect people around the world just with open thought leadership, and of course our customers. If you haven't heard of WatchGuard, we're a company that really focuses on bringing enterprise-grade security to the mid-market. We kind of, our core product that we started out with 20 or so years ago is something called it's now called a next-generation firewall or unified threat management device, but it was a firewall, a hardware-based firewall So basically think of that as all of your network security. But over the past 5 years, while I've been responsible for M&A as well, we've also acquired a bunch of companies. So we now have endpoint security. We acquired Panda Security and have a full EPP EDR product. Your listeners probably know EPP is endpoint protection, EDR is endpoint detection and response, and we even have MFA. So think of us as all around the three main pillars of security: network, endpoint, identity. We have products for all of that are really serving the mid-market.
And I understand your role there has kind of changed very recently. You've taken on a new title. Tell us about that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So my role before was the CTO. And in that role, I still ran the threat lab. I've kind of been our security expert forever, part of that threat lab forever, and really more kind of this outward security expert. And again, internally, I did things like M&A. I helped our product group to really add new security products to our portfolio. But the new change was, I didn't necessarily manage our own organization security. We've been doing that for decades ourselves. We are a security company. We're decent at it. But it was part of the IT role. And we just wanted to kind of have a head for accountability. So now the CSO role is me officially kind of guiding the security of our own organization.
So I'm really curious, Corey, what exactly drove you to become like an expert in security? Like if you go back in time, was there like an incident with little Corey in junior high school where like somebody broke into your locker and stole something and you're like, I'm protecting my shit from now on, And
I would say it's even the digital version of breaking into my locker. By the way, we have a podcast I won't pimp right now, but it's called Your Hacker Origin Story. And for me, I've always been a technology nerd. For the old graybeards out there, my dad one day when I was 8 brought home a Trash 80, and he brought it home for his own personal computer, but he never knew how to use it. I, of course, took that sucker apart, learned BASIC from magazines, got really into it. But I wasn't necessarily security focused other than, I was part of the internet when it was still when it wasn't the internet, when it was BBSs. I did get a little taste of things like Frack magazine, Freaking, for the people that remember old POTS hacking, telephone hacking. I got a taste of that. And that wasn't because I was caring about hacking or security. It was back then, even regional local calls cost money for my dad. And I remember him getting mad at my modem bills. So anyways, overall technology nerd. But the time it really hit me was, some of you may remember Internet Relay Chat. It exists today, IRC, but is less popular. As any nerd, it was a cool place for me to chat with people around the world that shared hobbies. If you remember those channels, the first person that starts something is the op, the administrator of the channel. And you do a lot to protect that name of the channel and who controls it's important. So you would set up these things called egg drop bots, a bot to stay on the channel that you could send commands to so that you always retain control of the channel. And one day our channel got hacked. It was a classic old IRC hack. It was, you could literally shut down the IRC server, and then when it comes back up, if you get to that channel first, you own it. And I didn't really pay attention to hacking in that aspect back then, but that opened my mind because I was really mad. And I ended up becoming kind of friends with the person that did it and started learning a little bit more about black site tactics, which I didn't like, by the way, because someone broke into my locker. I wanted to protect my locker, but I found it fascinating how you could get a system to do something it wasn't designed to, which is ultimately what hacking is.
Very interesting and very fascinating, I have to say. So did you have back in the day, you said you were on the internet very, very early, like back in the old phone days. Did you have that like receiver thing that you put the phone onto?
I did have a coupler modem, a 300, the first one we had for the Trash 80. Technically, that one was my dad's, but I had a 300 baud coupler modem, similar to the one you saw in War Games, if you ever watched that movie. One of my favorites before, Mr. Robot came out. So I had that. I will even say I had a little bit of early access to the real internet. Those are all BBSs. Things aren't connected to each other. It's just the phone line to one server. But my father was also in the military, and he was using ARPANET. And I used to see ARPANET when I went to work or went to work with him. And so yes, I guess I nerded out a little. I feel like I've watched the internet develop.
Robert, did you have one of those put the phone on the cradle things to dial out to servers and stuff via BBS?
Nah, I got my start in UHF VHF antennas, so we were we were in a little bit different wavelength than hooking the phone on one of those receivers. So I appreciate that stuff though.
Well, the
Awesome.
antennas are just as smart too. I mean, the same frequency and wavelength we use for radio, the people that can still make those really specialized long range antennas are important to all the Wi-Fi and other wireless markets today. So that's kind of a magic science in its own.
True. And before we dive down the RF rabbit hole there, let's kind of sidestep back to security. And now you mentioned back in the day, you got involved with this with IRC and some hacking that happened there. But the threats today are a lot more complicated, a lot more sophisticated, and specifically a lot more targeted. So Rich, I want to turn it over to you to kind of set up where we want to take the conversation.
So, Corey and I, in normal times, Corey and I sit down together every year at the RSA conference, and I always ask him pretty much the same question at some point in that interview. And so, I mean, that was an online conference this year. That this is our first chance in 2021 to speak. And as I have said before on the podcast, I'm pretty sure there are people in the world who enjoy being scared, and so they go to horror movies. I talk to people like Corey. And so my question for you, Corey, is what right now, just looking out there at the threat landscape, what scares you most?
Wow. So I would say there's three things I'm talking about. And being someone that talks about security a lot, these seem so cliche because you've heard them before. But the three things I worry about is kind of the change we've undergone in a workforce that will continue even now the pandemic is clearing up. The hybrid workforce is really changing the way we have to secure ourselves. And we are seeing ramifications of that and even changes in threat actors. So we could go into that one. The second one is supply chain attacks. Huge problem. Security folks have predicted it for a long time. A lot of small businesses or a lot of companies think they may not be the target of attack, but I don't think businesses realize how interconnected we are. Every business, no matter what it is, has some sort of partner. It could be the credit card machine they bring in to take payments. It could be the vendor they have to clean their offices, some sort of partner. And often we make digital connections to those partners, which is essentially a way to open up a little privilege to someone we trust more than a random user. And ultimately, when I talk about supply chain attacks, it's not necessarily the manufacturing supply chain, it's this digital supply chain, this long kind of ecosystem of partners all businesses have that is turning out to be the new weak link in all of our companies. We can do really good security, but if we accidentally partner with someone that does something a little different that we've extended privilege to, that becomes a weak point. And the final one's the one I'm kind of sick of talking about, but it's so freaking relevant today, is ransomware. And it's really specifically not the ransomware of 2013 to 2016 that got spammed to everyone, really human managed, very targeted, very sophisticated network attacks that are there to launch ransomware once they get in. Those obviously are continuing to pick up, and double extortion has gone to triple extortion. So they're obviously very effective, costing businesses millions. Happy to go into any of those, but those are the three things that do keep me up at night.
Well, let's maybe start with the home networks. I was looking recently at some of the security predictions you made for 2021, 6 or so months ago. And one of the things you said that was interesting was that you were concerned about attackers utilizing those under-secured weak home networks to specifically kind of hunt down corporate devices. Yep. And then use that as a kind of backdoor onto the corporate network. So, and what's new and concerning about that trend?
Well, there were two trends specifically that our predictions shared. One was kind of a generic prediction, but they are related, by the way, is attackers are going to swarm VPNs. VPNs, of course, are virtual private networks. One of the ways we get secure access to our companies when we're remote, whether at home or wherever. And RDP. Our RDP is Remote Desktop Protocol. We've all probably used that Microsoft protocol to remote control a computer. But as the remote workforce swells, they would attack VPN and RDP. And then the prediction you were mentioning is semi-related because we were worried about hackers specifically targeting home networks with worms that were designed to seek out VPNs particularly. So for the first one, I would say, one, it was kind of already happening before the pandemic, the attackers targeting VPNs and RDP, but we feel like that is definitely hit because VPN attacks have taken off. There's been a number of vulnerabilities in different VPN products. Even though they're old, maybe 6 months ago patched vulnerabilities. I don't want to name names because it's not about blaming those particular companies, but a couple of companies that have firewalls like ours and a VPN dedicated company have had flaws in their product that, since the customers didn't patch, hackers went out there, they leveraged those flaws to steal the keys and the passwords for those VPNs because they know that VPN is gold. You know, if I can get access to that VPN, in most cases, I have access to everything on that particular target headquarters network. So we've been seeing a lot of attacking of vulnerabilities in VPN and privileged credential stealing that's looking specifically for VPN credentials. The other prediction, and I'll explain it in a sec, is one that I don't think is hit yet. And it was kind of a technical Hail Mary for us because we made the prediction not having seen this malware before. But the prediction had two parts. One, you would target home networks with worms. For the folks out there, a worm is a type of malware that once it infects one computer, it can automatically try to infect others. So, by the way, bad guys have already been targeting home networks, so that's not really new. Worms sometimes are a part of that too, worms that spread on your home network privately. The new twist we gave to that prediction was these worms would have code to seek out VPN connections. And there's easy technical ways bad guys could write malware to do that. You know, for the Windows nerds out there, if you do ipconfig, you're going to see every adapter on the device, including the virtual adapter. There's a listed virtual adapter when you have a VPN that has common names. And then just the normal route command can show you the private networks associated with that virtual adapter. So it's pretty trivial for a malware actor to not only write malware that hits a home computer and tries to spread, but specifically looks to spread to the network the VPN is connected to, and thus tying the home attack to some corporate attack. So that has not happened yet as far as we've seen, you know, so that prediction so far is a miss. I think it's very clear the bad guys are targeting the VPN itself, but we haven't seen malware that has automated that in the way we described yet.
Corey, what are the ways that hackers are targeting home computers? Because you say that they're going to target the home networks and they're going to get worms on there that can kind of spread. What are the mechanisms that these hackers use to get into home networks? Is it just the fact that a lot of the home networking gateways are just really, really terrible?
Yeah, so we are seeing a lot of that even in our internet security report. One of the biggest issues with home networks is they simply don't have the security controls. They sometimes have some endpoint ones, but less at a network level. And we've seen a lot of attacks target IoT, specifically consumer routers. So there's a lot of attacks out there that are programmed to know the vulnerabilities in WTRT, you know, Netgear, Linksys, all the latest vulnerabilities that some consumer may not have patched. By the way, a lot of these are old and fixed, but people don't. You know, your hardware needs patches too. You know, it has software. It's called firmware when it's on your hardware, but it gets updates. My mom has not looked at her Comcast router forever. So hopefully they're forcing auto updates on her, because if not, there's an issue. But anyways, they're targeting consumer routers. Once they get on that router, it's a Linux system that gives them a bastion host where they can basically, A, monitor all the traffic that you're sending as a consumer, but B, a trusted place of privilege where you can directly gain access to the computers on that network itself. But honestly, the most common way is simply email. You know, most targeted attacks start with a spear phish, and most malware infections start with some sort of spam or phish that just had a link or something you had to download to install it yourself. So a lot of times, you know, the difference is they're still targeting the work user, but they're sending emails that are now coming to home, sometimes coming to the home through some cloud email server rather than the headquarters and all its protections. You can obviously add some antivirus to your cloud stuff too, but now when that email reaches the device, it may be a device at the home that's less protected and has a lot of connections to the internal company.
Interesting. Now, Robert, I want to send it over to you because I think you had something that you wanted to say, and hopefully it's not about phishing, because we're talking a lot about phishing, and I'm thinking about bass and cod, and all of the bad jokes are forming in my head as we go. So we got to get off this topic.
Yeah, well, the number one vector for introducing vulnerabilities is still email, right? It's still the biggest area of risk for inbound access. But what I was going to say is even, you know, Colonial's been in the news, and that has been now traced to a VPN connection that the user was no longer present, but the account was still active, right? So, and I can confirm what Corey's saying, and that we see it all the time in our operations, that I wish there was a way to measure it, but if you leave RDP open or you're pinholing RDP through, I mean, I got to imagine it's a matter of milliseconds that connection is actually discovered. And the raw amount of attack data or attack activity against that port, you know, here's a quick story. When we very first turned up our SIM in like 2014, I want to say it was, built a business case, right? Because you have to account for storage, maintenance, overhead, and everything. And one day our storage started to spike, and it was just ridiculous how fast it was growing. And it wasn't that it was going to give us a capacity issue immediately, but it was beyond anything that we had anticipated. And as we researched it, what we found is one of our clients had RDP open, and just the raw amount of activity, I mean, it's like mind-boggling. So if you have RDP open and you think you're being sneaky because you put it on a different port or any of those, you know, like, haha, I won't use 389. I'll move it over here to 65,202. Yeah, you're not fooling anyone. So
Totally agree. By the way, the other takeaway there is credentials. Nowadays, hackers don't have to hack, they just have to log in. I mean, the point Robert brought up with Colonial was it was via VPN, but it was because of a stolen credential. And same with RDP. There are direct exploits like, what was it, Blue Keep, which hopefully everyone has patched now, but we obviously know that not everyone keeps up to date with patches. But the RDP, you know, who cares about the security you have around it if they actually have a valid login? So one easy takeaway that we push a lot is MFA. MFA is not perfect, like no security control is, but nowadays credentials are the easiest way in. You don't really, I nerd out about 0 day, I nerd out about these really cool technical hacks, but that's not what they use half the time. They just use silly social engineering, get a credential, and identity is the cornerstone of security. All our security is based on trust, and we're blocking things, but we're allowing our privileged users in. So if I can get a credential, it's kind of game over.
Well, and let's just add a tidbit to that. You know, two, I'm going to call them cardinal sins that we see MSPs making is they'll have their user account also have admin privileges, using the username administrator or admin, which is a no-no in, you know, you got to mask that. Then the second one is cached credentials. Engineers get lazy, they cache the credentials somewhere. And if you ever run a breach attack simulation and you start to see the prevalence of how widespread that use is, it's mind-boggling. And so to Corey's point, as soon as you have credentials, no less got access with admin credentials, the dominoes start to fall really quickly. So,
well, see, I gotta way around all that, Corey. I stopped using password 123 a long time ago. I'm real sneaky now. I shouldn't say it on the show. I'll have to change it now, but I use 123 password now.
Oh, cool.
No one's gonna figure that one out.
Mine's a little better. I went for length. I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 passwords. So got a little length. So I'm
no.
good
You
now.
Throw a 7 on there, and like it's just rocks
NSA
out.
won't even get it at that point. By the way, we're joking. If the sarcasm's not thick enough, please hear it.
I want to come back to something. I want to ask both you guys, Corey and Rob, about this, because given a lot of what you were just saying about VPN, do you think the people in our audience here today are perhaps overconfident in VPN? I imagine there are some people listening right now who are thinking, well, my customers are okay. I've got them all behind VPN. Is that a problem?
I do think so. Now I say that, by the way, being a vendor that has VPN and supports it as a good security mechanism, but it comes with caveats. You need to use it as a mechanism with some sort of assessment check. Like before there's products that before a VPN connection is made, the endpoint has to pass some things. Antivirus, is it installed per policy? Is it got an update? Does the computer have the proper patch level? What's the user like? You know, it does some extra things before it gives you that I call it a backdoor. It's a secure backdoor. You're doing it on purpose, but it really is a backdoor into your network if it's done by a malicious person. So when you're doing VPN, you have to implement it in a way where there's some sort of health check of the endpoint before it gets in. And we just said MFA. VPN is good, but credentials can be still stolen. Add MFA to it. And the final thing that you're going to see happening is VPN is evolving. There's this idea of zero trust network access. So it's the same use case. It's a way of getting a remote secure person to access stuff at your corporation or assets of your corporation. But the difference is that zero trust. VPNs are typically configured to just open up the network of your headquarters. You know, you can actually, by the way, limit them to specific things, but most people just open them up to the whole network. Zero trust is about this user can only access this applications. And while once he logs in, I'm going to give him access to only those applications. I'm not giving him full control of my network. I'm not giving the accountant access to anything that gets him to source code or vice versa. So it's a much more granular, it follows what security people call the least privilege principle. So it's a way of still doing VPN, but in a much granular level that limits people so that if the connection somehow gets hijacked, it's segmented from the whole keys to the kingdom.
So, you know, MFA has come up a few times here, and I'm going to quote you on this because this is something that I quoted from you, Corey, in a sort of security predictions roundup that I did in December or January or whatever. And you said, we know it's bold, but we predict that in 2021, every service that doesn't have MFA enabled will suffer a breach or an account compromise. We're not talking 70%, 95, 100% if you're not using MFA. So first of all, I'm still feeling that way. And second of all, I mean, what do you think the adoption rate for MFA is probably right now with the audience that we're talking to?
Good question. So first of all, I'll let you know that even at the beginning, we never thought that would perfectly hit. That was a hyperbole prediction on purpose. The one thing I'll say with all our predictions is there's no such thing as a prediction. I don't have a magic ball. When we talk about our predictions and webinars and our podcast, we start by saying, really the point of this is to talk about the underlying trends. Every trend we talk about, there's some underlying trend that we're extrapolating into a prediction. So first I'll start by saying, not every single service in the world has yet been hacked because it didn't have MFA, but it's only because it's a matter of time. It's going to take time for hackers to get through those millions of services. The truth is almost every breach we see that involves credentials could have been pretty much, you know, mitigated with MFA. There's so many attacks, you know, Robert mentioned the Colonial pipeline, but many of the big ransomware attacks we started with credentials. Some of the MFSPs that got breached and had ransomware spread to those credentials, or their customers, I should say, started with credential leaks. So we stand by the kind of theme of the prediction that it's the most, any public internet service you have, anything that you're exposing to the public and has an authentication, you really need to have MFA on it. There's so many ways. By the way, there's ways around MFA, but they're harder. So it's just, we want that prediction to be there because we believe so strongly that over time it will be true. It's not going to hit 100% in any one year, but it will become true if you don't have it.
Now, you also said you don't have a magic ball. Rich, I thought the entire reason he was here is because you said he had a magic ball.
I had to send it to service. It had a little crack on it. My dog knocked it over.
What kind of dog do you have?
I have a Cavalier, a King Charles Cavalier Spaniel. Yeah, I think that's right.
That's a lot of things. Is that a little dog? I don't know a lot about dogs.
Medium-sized dog. Hey, you know what?
Oh, we're going to get to see the dog. Yay.
There's listeners who this doesn't matter, but if you see the video, you'll see the little guy right now who wonders why I just woke her up.
Oh, so cute, though. That was adorable.
Yeah. The benefit of working at home, right? Where else will the CSO show you his dog on an interview?
You know, one quick mention, and it dovetails off what was just shared, is, you know, we get called in a lot by new MSP partners who haven't yet partnered and are now in the fire, if you will. And two of the last, however many events over the last few weeks have both been tied to lack of adoption to even the MSP implementing 2FA, right? So when you consider the critical nature of it, and it is not perfect, but 2FA, while not being the end all, at least adds an additional layer that has to be transitioned before they can get to the sweet spot. And that 2FA lack of on both instances of the two that I'm thinking of, one was for the RMM server, right? So now you're saying the keys to the kingdom with the administrator and no 2FA on it. And that's how events like what happened in Texas happened, right? So, and then the other one was just a 365 administrator account that also did not have 2FA. And so when you have these resources that are just hanging out there without that additional layer of protection, if you will, you're literally playing with fire.
And Robert, you actually reminded me of Rich's second question, is how much do I feel it's deployed among, for instance, our listeners? And by the way, I've seen surveys, enterprises could be in the 80s and 90s, but if you're talking to small to medium businesses, there are surveys that suggest it's around 50 to 60%. But now, this is, if you ever listen to Bill Maher, this is something I can't prove, but I think is a fact. But I think the issue with those surveys is if I ask the question to an IT administrator, do you use MFA? The answer is going to be yes, because the administrator probably has 4 or 5 accounts that the privileged user, meaning the administrator, the IT guy that manages routers, has MFA. But if the question is, have you deployed MFA to every employee so that when they're logging on to their laptop from the start of the day to when they're logging on to any SSO app in the cloud, are they using MFA? That's when I personally feel like it's kind of a green field out there. Even SMBs have started deploying it, but they've kind of limited it to privileged users rather than only few have deployed it to all employees at the enterprise. And the key thing is it's not just even those underprivileged employees. If you're not implementing zero trust, they're almost as dangerous as getting an administrative account. You actually have a lot of extra privilege to do lateral movement with their accounts. So to me, deploying MFA means every user at the company has to be using it every day.
Well, to comment, enterprise has more leverage to force MFA on its user base because of policy, and they'll typically have compliance officers who are driving policy and pushing it down. I can't count how many calls I get from partners who are like, client won't do it. They've got a finicky user base. They're more concerned with convenience and access, and their executives who are used to doing what they want, when they want, how they want to, are still reluctant to embrace what is really a simple step, right? Whether it's a text message with 6 numbers or just a simple acknowledgement on an app. It's not that difficult, and it's still amazing the reluctance of some user bases to embrace it, regardless.
I still agree, Robert. I 100% agree. But what I want to do with all those customers is show them, like, MFA is not a new secret security experts in the last 5 years learned. We knew this 30 years ago. But what Robert said is why it's not widely. It was a huge pain in the ass. But, excuse me, in fact, I think you had to have hardware tokens at one time for sure. You know, it's hard to deploy. It had a costly server you had to manage. But what those customers need to know, what those small organizations, MFA has changed big time in the past 5 years. Now it's hosted as a cloud service. There's nothing for you to install. And the second part of, I can agree with the user. If I had to type my password, but then also type something else, that little 6-character code, that tiny bit of friction is enough to irritate me, right? The push authentication is so different to me. The one where he said you just approved. The push authentication is I type my password like normal. Then my phone just dings and says, hey, Corey, I see you logging on from Seattle. Is this true? Yes or no? That pressing a button is easier than typing something. The second part of removing the friction is tying it to a single sign-on portal. Before, as I worked, I would have to go to Office 365, log in, use MFA. Then I'd have to go to Salesforce, log in, use MFA a second time on the same day, log into my laptop, use MFA again for a third time. Now all of that is controlled by a single sign-on portal. So I log into MFA one time by going to this portal, and then the buttons to all the assets I want to get to are there. I just press Salesforce, and then it starts to use things like SAML and other tricks to pass that authentication with me not having to do the MFA over and over. So if you were one of those people that thinks MFA is a pain, it was too complex, look at it today. It's a lot easier. It's a lot cheaper. And though the friction will always be there because we are adding that little step, the actual step itself is getting easier, and it literally lessens the amount of times you have to manually type your username or password from what it was 10 years ago.
So we'll wrap up on one more topic, and this is maybe, further out there. But we just posted a story recently on ChannelProNetwork.com about deep fakes. And so how big a threat are deep fakes today, and when maybe does that become more of a problem?
I have an opinion. I'm going to let Robert start if you're interested. Otherwise,
fire away, dude.
They scare the heck out of me. I mean, they're funny that, when they're not used for gross, inappropriate reasons. I remember seeing, is it the Tom Cruise one that some actor did? It really good and really funny, but they have societal implications, digital security implications. I mean, one of my worries about the way we're going with authentication is I think MFA is the answer, but the world seems to be moving to just biometrics. Passwords are broken, passwords are dead. Just use your fingerprint or face. Hey, that's easy. Or maybe use a voice print. That's easy. It's one thing. You just have to look at a camera. Biometrics is a great additional token, but it can be cracked too. Even Face ID was cracked by Vietnamese researchers, I think 3 weeks after it was released, using a 3D printed face with special printed out eyes. I can get your 3D print of your face by, if you post 3 pictures on Facebook, your profile, you're straight on in a 3/4. Photogrammetry can help me recreate a model of your face. And with more pictures, I could create a pretty convincing one. And then you have this idea of a deep fake that can make a video of you. And by the way, there's deep fakes for voice too. There's something called Lyrebird, where it doesn't take Corey saying many words before it can start speaking whole sentences in Corey's voice. And so I'm not saying biometrics are bad. They're a great token to add to multi-factor, but it scares me for social reasons, just the fact that we live in this place where people seem to have trouble identifying fact from fiction without trickery. And then you add this trickery that machine learning is just going to make it better and better. We're still right at the cusp where there's that uncanny valley where you can look for, and there'll be this point where suddenly humans can't identify it, but there will still be digital indicators. But machine learning keeps on improving. The more data it gets, the better the algorithm gets. So it scares me quite a bit, even though I'm also a technologist. I mean, there's probably a ton of value to what you could do with it too. But the negative ramifications are something we should think about as a society.
Well,
Robert, your thoughts?
In an era of massive disinformation, it definitely introduces an additional layer of complexity. People with the events of the last year and work from home and all the additional stressors are already in a state of maybe less attention to detail of an email that comes in, of even checking if it's like actually who they think it is, hovering or doing any of the simple steps. And so when you introduce, the concept or even the activity of deep fake, now those users were maybe half of paying attention, right? That much more susceptible. And the scary thing is how good some of this is, right? Not good in the content, but good in how, you really have to look closely with a keen eye to even detect that it might be anything other than authentic. So, it's interesting because when you consider how marketers call people, right? And you answer the phone and hello, and how much of that does it really take to get a lock on your voice to then be able to replicate it, right?
Yeah.
Just a simple act of answering your mobile phone and speaking a couple words can introduce your voice into a machine learning or AI that can now replicate you for malicious content or malicious purposes. So it's definitely gonna be wild watching that one move forward.
Let's give a direct example that even relates to one of the predictions we made for this year is automation is going to drive a tidal wave of spear phishing. And by the way, I wasn't thinking deep fakes. Spear phishing, everyone knows in the audience, it's a very targeted form of phishing. So the bad guy has to learn something about you, your title, or at least your business to add something to the email that's a little personalized. The only thing that saves victims from spear phishing is that little extra reconnaissance. It takes more work for the attacker to learn about you and write this custom email. That prediction was about bad guys are now automating the techniques that they use to kind of grab data from social networks and websites, and they already have the automated spammers. So now they can write they can write spear phish that have personalized details without manually doing reconnaissance. It can be automated, and now spear phishing can be spammed. But let's talk about deepfakes in that. Now imagine the spear phish doesn't only seem to come from your boss as far as a technical email address. It doesn't only seem to talk about something that you do at work, but the writing style is your boss's writing style. There are algorithms, machine learning algorithms that can literally pay attention to writing style and replicate the same writing style. Let's take what Robert said. Vishing with a V, voice phishing is a very big thing. You know, you have the Microsoft, hey, we detected a virus on your computer. I'm here to help you fix it. But now imagine, instead of getting an email to an accountant where the CFO is asking for a transfer, you get a call from your, CFO saying, hey, this partner's mad, you need to transfer this money. So there's so much directly in cybersecurity ways to take advantage of all this deep fake technology and essentially machine learning and AI. It's such a huge boon for security too, but expect bad guys to use machine learning just as much.
It's going to be a big deal. Like when I think of something of an old expression that's been around forever, which is like, I'll believe it when I see it. You can't believe what you see anymore. You can't believe what you hear. We have to adopt a whole new standard of security, which is not just zero trust networking. It's zero trust living is what our future is.
I'm skeptical of everything.
Right. You have to second guess and verify everything.
I guess
that is a scary.
I'll believe it when a forensic examiner tells me that the video is legitimate.
Right. Assuming that it's actually the voice of the forensic examiner on the phone telling you what the results were.
Now
right?
we have inception of deep fakes.
If you want to talk about the stuff that keeps me up at night, that's the stuff that keeps me up at night.
Well,
Holy
it begs
cow.
the question, Matt, are we already in the Matrix?
Yeah, Elon Musk thinks so, right?
Which pill are you going to take, Robert? The red one or the blue one?
No doubt. It's red all day.
You're going red? I'm going orange. I'm going to make my own new pill. I don't know.
That's a good answer. The person I want to be says blue, but come on, sometimes ignorance might be bliss.
It sure might be. Great stuff, Corey. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank you so much for having you on. For those who want to learn a little bit more about you, get in touch with you, or learn more about WatchGuard, where can they go?
Well, definitely they can go to watchguard.com for the company, but I encourage you to check out Secplicity, SECPLICITY.org, secplicity.org. It's kind of our public thought leadership blog. We post our podcast there. We have real-time threat intelligence showing you the malware and attacks we see. And whenever news stories and things come up, our analysts write about it and give you practical tips to protect yourself. And
you did mention the podcast. So you please go ahead and tell us what podcast.
Yeah, the podcast is called the 443 Podcast. You can find it on all the slingers. And definitely if you go to secplicity.org, you'll see it for sure.
Fantastic. We encourage everyone to check that out. Corey, thanks again so much for being on with us. It was a joy having you here, and hopefully we'll have you back again in the near future. With that, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, Robert Boles will be on the other side with us while we close out the show with some regular end of the show features and a little bit of fun. You won't want to miss it. Stick around. We'll be right back. And we are back with part 3 of this episode of ChannelPro Weekly. Rich, great interview with Corey Nachreiner. I really enjoyed it. Went a little longer than I expected, but we covered some great topics. A lot of really good information. Robert, thank you so much for being involved in that and sharing your insights. A lot of value out of that. A lot of fun, of course. But Rich, any particular takeaways you want to highlight?
You know what? This is like a terrible admission almost. I didn't know he had a podcast. So I need to go subscribe to his podcast because he's always an interesting guy, as you saw.
Also, Robert, any interesting takeaways for you? Anything that you learned of interest?
I just think maybe not learned, but what he highlighted about supply chain attacks. Yeah, can definitely say we're seeing an increase in that. You know, with businesses partnering, it's not always part of the process to assess your partner's security. Now, saying that, I am seeing even that aspect of it more. We're getting more requests from existing clients like, hey, we had a partner send us a security questionnaire. Can you help us complete it so we can be, answer with integrity? So, bringing that to the forefront. Yeah, absolutely. I wish more people would pay closer attention there.
For sure. And where else but ChannelPro Weekly can we talk about deep fakes and the basically the end of civilization as you know it, and still end on a laugh? Because here at ChannelPro Weekly, we make doom and gloom fun. I guess, I don't know. Good time. So awesome stuff. Rich, we've got a little bit of time left. I think a round of 5 questions is in order. So for those who don't know what that is, with our guests, often Rich and I like to sit them down and ask them 5 completely random, off-the-cuff questions about anything and everything. The whole shtick here is that these are not written up front, and Rich and I have sworn a pledge to each other that we will never pre-write these questions. We will make them up on the fly. Now, sometimes we might have an idea if we're going through the show of like one that we want to ask, but we're not allowed to write them down. And we're going to ask him to Robert and see what he says. Robert, nothing embarrassing, no gotchas. It's just to have a little bit of fun and learn a little bit more about you. Are you ready?
Yeah, rock and roll.
All right, Rich, question number 1 to you.
So Rob, you mentioned at the beginning of the show, mountain biking is one of the things that you like to do in your spare time. And I remember you telling me once upon a time that whenever you are celebrating some good news or just rewarding yourself for a job well done, you'll go out and buy a mountain bike. So A, how many do you have? And B, what is the favorite?
Oh, wow. Rich, are you clairvoyant? Like, that is such a timely question. So just this past Sunday, I drove up to Bend, Oregon, to a great little bike shop up there, Sagebrush, just to mention it. Anybody in the area, the guys there are awesome. But I bought a new pivot. BLOKWORX had an incredible run last year in growing our partner base, and it was one of those times it was like, all right, it's time for a new bike. So definitely pivot, and I am looking forward to getting out on it this weekend. So thanks for asking.
Awesome.
Very nice.
Awesome. All right, I'll take question number 2. I'll keep going the mountain bike round here. So what is the most I don't know if this has ever happened. Have you ever had a bad accident on a mountain bike, like a tumble, a fall, and what was that? What happened?
Yeah, pick one. Wow. I'll bring one up so the Tahoe Rim Trail, if you guys ever get a chance to get up to Tahoe, whether you hike or bike, it literally goes along the perimeter of the lake. And it's the piece I'm specifically thinking of is called the flume. So it's really skinny. One side is the rock going up, and the other side is kind of like this treacherous cliff dropping down to the lake. And, fortunately, this didn't happen there, but it was on another part of the trail where I came around a corner too fast. There was a tree that had fallen across the trail, and I wasn't able to stop. And in a blink of an eye, I was laying on my back, staring at the sky. I wasn't injured, it's totally fine, but just laying there perfectly aligned in the trail, staring at the sky, no idea where my bike is. If it went someplace I would not be able to recover, but fortunately I had no injury, but it was one of those things that happened so quickly. You just thank God you're okay.
Wow. So did you go like over the handlebars?
Oh yeah. I went over the handlebars and my bike went over me. So, I mean, my bike was literally 15 feet beyond where I landed. So to give you an idea how fast I was going, and shockingly, no scratches, no injuries, no, I mean, I had a helmet on luckily, but yeah, just one of those moments, right? So.
Wow. Well, I am glad you are not seriously injured. So that way you're able to be here to talk to us today. Rich, question number 3 to you.
Oh gosh, let's see. I tend to gravitate when I'm, looking for a question to something food related. So how about this? You can only have one for the rest of your life. Flour tortillas or corn tortillas?
Oh my God.
Oh, that's an easy one. Corn all day long, corn tortillas. Just call me old school. Yeah, we'll go corn.
Well, and that's a smart choice too, because if you pick flour, then you can't have Doritos anymore. And that would be a crime against all humanity.
I'm actually curious back to you guys on that one. Corn or flour, they're at the ChannelPro Professional Association.
Ooh, Rich, he's asking the question back.
It's a brutal question. And I think I'm gravitating towards flour because I'm just thinking a life without that kind of burrito would just be a hard one to live. So, but yeah, I don't know. That's a hard one.
It is a hard one as well. I think I would go with you, Robert. I think if forced to choose, I would choose corn over flour. But I do but I like flour. Like you can have flour for burritos, and then I like corn for tacos. So it's kind of like tough, But if it meant giving up Doritos and tortilla chips and salsa and like guac, it's corn all like no decision. Corn all day long. Yeah,
well, it's a fair point. You are not going to see a corn tortilla burrito. They're not that flexible. So
they do not exist. Although, Rich, maybe we should invent one and change the world. No, that wouldn't really change the world, but it would be an interesting, probably greasy burrito. Robert, question number 4 to me, I suppose. We were talking about cuddly creatures. If you were forced to hug the ugliest creature on the planet, what creature would it be?
So I'm forced.
You're forced to hug the ugliest creature on the planet. So you have to cuddle with not a cuddly creature, but an ugly creature.
So
what would it be?
You've got to cuddle with like literally your least favorite creature, is what you're saying.
Yes, whatever you find the most ugly.
I'm gonna go back to my gargoyles because they're, you know what? Why not? You know they're good-hearted, so at least if they're ugly, get a good hug and get on with your day. So,
is that a real creature though? I'm thinking like real life creature.
Is it?
I don't know.
Is a gargoyle like, what's the show where you got to get in a bath with bugs or something? Is that the kind of question this is? Or
I suppose I get like, hey, when you have to make up the questions on the fly, they don't always work very well.
All right, then hands down, Puffin. Going back to the Puffin.
The cutest and ugliest creature on the planet, apparently. How does that work? I have no idea, but that's interesting. All right, Rich, not a very good question number 4, but it's been squandered and it's gone now. Hopefully your question number 5 is better.
Well, let's see. You mentioned you are a veteran, Rob. You were in the Marines.
Yeah.
Did you have a nickname? If so, what was it? And how did you get that name?
That's funny. Yeah, I did. I was the extremist. Shockingly, I'm sure you're surprised. But I don't just do things. I have to go all the way. And I had someone actually drew me a logo one time of a tachometer completely tapped out in the red. So yeah, there was a little history there. But yeah, that's a good question, Rich. You're on point today.
That other guy, not so much on point today, but that's okay.
Well, Matt, you're always on point. I mean, you guys do a great show. I really appreciate being here. It's a privilege, and with gratitude, thank you. So
we love having you here, but don't say goodbye just yet. So Rich, we've got 2 weeks of things that we might have missed that we might need to go through. So why don't you tell us what we might have missed and what we might see coming up next week?
Well, every Friday, as it happens, on ChannelProNetwork.com, we catch folks up on things they might have missed in the technology news. That column is written by our own James Gaskin. And in this week's column, he's going to be talking about those new specializations, advanced specializations from Microsoft. There's a new version of Google Workspace out there for smaller users that you might want to take a look at. A new partner program for MSSPs from Cowbell Cyber. Once upon a time, we had their CEO on the program. That's a cyber insurance company. And then, gosh, what was the other? Oh, yes. Yeah, there is a petition circulating on the internet right now. There are people who are strongly encouraging Jeff Bezos of Amazon to purchase the Mona Lisa and eat it. And James will tell you a little bit more about, because what else is he doing with the money these days at this point? Now, coming up next week, we've been talking about security. Next week, I'm going to be at the IT Nation Secure Conference. This is a ConnectWise event, 100% focused on security. I'm looking forward to that. HPE does its annual Discover Partner event next week, hoping to cover that remotely. Our good buddy Joel Zadespinner of ChannelPro will be at the IT Expo event in Miami, and I'm sure there will be plenty of news breaking in the industry as well.
Sounds like a lot to catch up on and a lot to look forward to. Can't wait for all of that stuff. Did you also mention the upcoming Fine Biometrics event?
Oh gosh, yes, yeah, and I have a bit part, a supporting part in that. FineBiometrics.com, by the way, is a sister publication of our same parent company, essentially, and they are doing a conference next week, June 23rd. You can read all about it at events.channelpronetwork.com. This is a virtual event, still plenty of time to sign up and get in. And I did I contributed like a half-hour panel discussion about smart point of sale systems to that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. Like the whole biometric industry is just very interesting. And we kind of touched on biometrics a little earlier, so that kind of sparked my memory here to talk about that today. But neat stuff. And I was looking at the agenda, and I can't wait to listen to some of these panels and presentations, because it's just really neat what they're doing in biometrics. I don't know. Do you do a lot in biometrics, Rob?
There's some simple biometric authentication that we are exposed to, but it's not part of any of our native stuff we're working with. It's more something that may exist somewhere already with a client or partner. So,
and as you look forward, is that something that you're kind of eyeing, like, ooh, that might be stuff we might need to do someday?
It's a great question. I don't know yet. I think it's TBD. There's so much uncertainty right now with authentication, and really, like, there's no gold standard, right? So when we talked about deep fakes earlier, so I'm gonna do a little research and let that one marinate a little bit longer before making a decision on that.
Yeah, cool. Well, it is neat stuff. At least it's an exciting industry. Lots of stuff happening, lots of new innovations. So it will be interesting to see where it goes and how it impacts the channel. So that's why, folks, you should check it out. Learn more, events.channelpronetwork.com. Rob, awesome having you on. I love it when you're here. We have a great time. We learn a lot, because you're just so smart when it comes to security and so entrenched into this. You've been around a long time. So for those who want to pick your brain, learn about you, get in touch with you, do business with you, where can they go? How can they get a hold of you?
Info@BLOKWORX.com, and with BLOKWORX, as always, got to make sure you spell it right. It's only 8 letters. That's a good sanity check right off the bat. But info@BLOKWORX.com, or just check us out at BLOKWORX.com. Again, channel only and partner driven. So again, appreciate you guys having me on, and it's always a blast to be here. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, and this is your second stint as guest host. I'm sure we'll see you back for a third somewhere down the road. I can't wait for that. And when Rob returns and joins us, how can you know? Subscribe to the Channel Pro Weekly podcast, anywhere podcasts are found, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, whatever, Spotify, Stitcher, we're everywhere, and everywhere you get those. Also, subscribe on YouTube if you like to watch. Do both. Why not? Then you get to see our bright, smiley faces. You can hit the red button there and the bell, and leave a comment below. Tell us what you're thinking, questions that you want us to ask our guests, so on and so forth, and we will absolutely do that. Love to be engaged with you in any way possible. Podcast at channelpronetwork.com is the email address. Send us an email there as well. And of course, each and every day, channelpronetwork.com is the website you should go to for articles, news, white papers, downloads, resources, all kinds of stuff. If you are a channel, if you're in the channel, that should be your homepage to get all of that great information, stay on top of what's going on in the industry, as well, of course, following us on the socials. And with that, we will see everybody in episode 190 next week. See you then.